Good morning. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. Good morning. I would like to present you the 113th class of the Harvard Trade Union Program. Please enter.
All right, let's get this party started. Welcome, everybody, to Harvard Law School, and as Alida said, to the graduation of the 113th class of the Harvard Trade Union Program. We're thrilled to have all of you with us. We have obviously our class, but also welcome to friends, family, colleagues who have come to celebrate this great day with all of our participants. We've got faculty from the program here and alumni, and we're just really excited to have everybody with us. Oh, not everybody's excited though. Oh. For our guests, let me tell you a little bit about what this class has gone through together during the past 5 weeks. They have had more classroom hours than a semester of Harvard undergraduate program. They've had almost 100 different classes. They have met about 60 different faculty members and speakers, including labor leaders, economists, lawyers, sociologists, political scientists, technologists, and others, and government officials spanning the range from the Vice President of Spain to the new Secretary of Labor in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They have had many mindful minutes, and I hope they will all remember to notice what you notice. They toured Boston labor history sites. They went back in history to Lawrence and Lowell, Massachusetts. They were welcomed by many of our local brothers and sisters in the labor movement, including a visit to IBEW Local 103 and to the Massachusetts nurses for tours of their training centers and to share wonderful dinners. I think some went to hockey games, which probably made our Canadian participants happy. They watched and maybe even wept over the outcome of the Super Bowl at a classmate's house. They dug deep to define their own personal narratives. They spent 2 days negotiating. They met the authors of many books. They watched the movies 9 to 5 and American Agitator. They read literally thousands of pages of homework. They got a mention in a national publication by the coolest labor reporter working today. That was exciting. They stepped up and supported each other during some difficult days, especially for some of your members, and that was really a great thing to see and to hear about. I mean, not the difficult days, but the way that you supported each other. As promised, you trekked through a major snowstorm, and I will say, even for Boston, that was a big snowstorm. And you persevered through an extraordinary number of very, very cold days. And you made more than 33 new friends. All right, families, friends, colleagues who are here with us. I hope this litany of what our participants have gone through over the past 5 weeks explains why you haven't heard too much from them. They've been really busy. But I want to say to all of you, thank you for your sacrifice. 5 weeks is a long time, and you stepped up and filled in for those 5 long weeks, whether that was being a single parent, working 2 jobs, rearranging your lives so that we could do this work together. But I have one more request of you. Please be patient when you hear over and over again in the coming weeks, well, at Harvard, we did this, or at Harvard, we did that. I can say without reservation that this truly is a special class. I heard that from faculty over and over again. I loved hearing from the faculty, from Alida, from Jack, Thea, Yuri, how you've grown and found your voices. You know, we brought you the best, what we believe is the best of the best at Harvard and from around the country. You know, they were world experts in their field, and you engaged them in a remarkably meaningful way, always respectful, but never intimidated. You brought a seriousness of purpose. You showed up on time every day. You did the reading. You worked on your presentations outside of class. You took field trips together. But maybe most importantly, you created a vibrant community within this group. It's a lot of time to spend together. It's sort of unprecedented in our lives to come together with people you don't know and have this kind of intense experience. You know, some of us do it in school, but once you get out of school, you don't really do that. Maybe you go into a workplace, but then you go home at night. This is an unusual experience. And you treated each other with respect, kindness, and graciousness. You took care of each other. You made it a safe space to share personal stories. You challenged each other's ideas and opinions, but not each other. And you made each other better because you were here together. So where do you go from here? First, I'm sure I don't even have to tell you this, rest. Reconnect with your real lives. But then really think about how to use not just the information that you learned, but the experiences that you had and the growth that you achieved. Be better at your jobs than you were before you came here, because the labor movement needs no less. Spent a lot of time talking about how challenging the situation is that we all face today. But we also talked about the opportunities that this moment presents. You now have tools to play an even bigger role in being part of the solution to the problems that we all face. And then my last request to you is keep in touch. Help us to learn from how you made it through this program and how we can work with you to make it even better for the benefit of your brothers and sisters who will come next. Then I really am speaking to our team, and it really is a team that contributes to making this 5 weeks so special. So I want to say thank you to our amazing faculty, many of whom are here with us today. I'm going to thank our support network within Harvard Law School, including the events team, many of whom are represented by here Local 26 and SEIU 32BJ. And thank you to our CLJE team, and it really is an amazing team. Jack, who teaches and is so present for everyone in the program. Yuri, who helped with events and in the classroom. Giovanni, who got us the rooms. That might sound like a simple thing, but I assure you that is a monumental accomplishment. And made sure all of our events went well and just keeps us all organized. Taya, who was so often a helpful presence in the classroom and in our events. Vonda, who spent almost the whole program here with us in Cambridge, which we just loved. Michelle, who couldn't be with us here today, but who tackled the important topic of tech in an actionable manner. I know she probably also scared you a little bit, but really gave just an insight into what is happening today that I think is unique. But then, obviously, most especially, thank you to Alida, who did everything and who did it so amazingly well. So the last, yes. So that leaves only to say, congratulations, class of 2026.
Well, you're graduating from this program into an America that is not in great shape in many ways, and you're also graduating into a country where the labor movement is not in great shape. And we hope you will come up with good ideas and you will do things to turn this around. And I think of Harvard in the program as a place where we will support you if you got some things you want done where we can help. It's got to be a lot of people working together to turn around the situation in the country. And I would say, be as creative as you can be when you go back to your jobs. Look for something, that may be a little weird, but maybe that's going to be a way of making a breakthrough of some sort for the workers and the people of the country. And so I wanted to give one example of something that I was surprised when I found this happened, because it's in the state of Indiana, and it's going to be about the people we're studying now, the graduate student unions and the medical intern, the young people who have been organizing massively and may need help in the next year to keep their unions alive and going if there's going to be really negative stuff. So Indiana is a state where the unions are not allowed in the public sector, basically. And one group of students at Indiana formed a graduate student union, and I sort of, looked and said, well, they're not going to do anything. They can't. They negotiate with no one. The university will not do any discussions with them. And they're sort of a sub-union type group. And you think, well, they can't really accomplish much. Well, they called a strike in 2022. Their strike succeeded in ways that, to me, were surprising. So it means even if you don't have a collective bargaining agreement, even if you don't, have a real strong formal union structure, they had support from their national union that was involved, which was the UE, and they got. I brought with me some of the figures because I said, "Holy mackerel! They did things." For the students who were getting stipends for their research activities, before they had their strike and they were getting $15,000. That's really bad for students. They got it up to $24,000. They calculated the union that the living wage for graduate student type people would have been $26,000 or something. They got it moved up a lot. And they got a number of other things that I wouldn't have expected. The university doesn't meet with, the universities, they can meet and talk to them, but we don't collectively bargain and we don't negotiate and we don't sign anything. And yet they managed to do some things, and they're still alive and kicking and not. So when I saw this, I said, oh, geez, one should study that more. Speaking now as an academic, we should find out, how did they manage to carry this off? What did the UE do to help support them over this period? They're getting dues, and the dues are not deducted at the pay. They've got to go to students who are not wealthy. As a graduate student living on a stipend, you're not wealthy at all, and they managed to survive. And so, any kinds of things you can see going on by any group of people who maybe will not be able to get a collective bargaining contract, will not be able to unionize in the next 3 years. Certainly the number of NLRB elections is going down. The success rate is not mildly down, but we're not seeing any burst over this period. And so to you, I say, think about stuff, and then you come back to Harvard and say, hey, we've got something that we see looks good. How can we, make it bigger for the country? So you have a real job to do, in addition to being happy you're no longer in classroom for hours and hours and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Okay. It is truly my privilege to introduce our graduation speaker. Darrick Hamilton is a university professor, the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy, and the founding director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School. He is truly a pioneer in the field of economics. His work has helped to redefine how an economy should work, identify powerful opportunities for investment in human capacity, and to interrogate strategies that propel collaboration to advance the realization of economic inclusion, social equity, and civic engagement for all people in the United States and around the globe. Darrick was born and raised in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, New York. So, yeah, Brooklyn. He is a graduate of Oberlin College and received a PhD in economics from the University of North Carolina. He has developed and collaborated on transformative policy proposals that have shifted billions of dollars into the hands of people, inspiring legislative proposals at the federal, state, and local levels, including on reparations, baby bonds, guaranteed income, and a federal job guarantee. He has another very important title, and that is Chief Economist of the AFL-CIO. That means when you hear statistics about the unemployment rate or inflation or GDP growth or whatever, Darrick isn't going to tell you what those numbers mean for the economy or the stock market or the financial services sector. His job is to tell you what those numbers mean for working people. We have been so lucky to have him here in Cambridge this year as a prestigious Radcliffe Fellow. I can tell you from personal experience, he is even dealing with all of these heavy, important subjects. Darrick is just a joy to be around, so I am so happy to welcome him as our graduation speaker.
Oh, what an honor, and congratulations. Gratitude to Professor Freeman, gratitude to Professor Block, whose outstanding intellect doesn't stay in the classroom. They translate it into action and ultimately public engagement with a goal of trying to bring about justice. Indeed, it's an honor to be before you all and speaking before you all because the labor movement is committed to justice. And you all are graduating from this prestigious program and going to take these learnings, and I'm sure going to bring it into your various professions and make a difference. I'm going to frame my remarks today in what has come to be labeled as an affordability crisis. But the big idea is about power, it's about common sense, and about a political economy to build agency for people in the first, second, and third places. Right now, we live in a paradigm or a common sense that manages people as if they're cost to be managed. What we need is a flip in that relationship. What we need is to invest in people because they are our most treasured resource, and the point of an economy should be people in the first place. The Harvard intellectual Marshall Gantz teaches us that there are various ways in which one can organize power and bring about new systems and structures. He talks about organized money and organized people as mechanisms to attain, utilize power, and shift paradigms. Well, I'm going to put my bets in organized people, the labor movement, to bring about justice. Let me also say a quick thing about power, and I'm going to quote from Dr. Martin Luther King in his seminal book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? He says, quote, "Power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change." And here's also what he says. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive. I'd say that we're seeing a lot of that going on today, exercises in power without love. But he has a message also to those people that have power and don't use it. He says, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. I think power sums up so much. Isn't that the point? Don't people want agency in their lives? Don't they want capabilities? And in that simple statement, we also need a realization that that agency needs to be accompanied with values. So right now, our gross and obscene concentrations in both wealth and power is wreaking havoc on our democracy, as well as our collective ability to envision and establish a just and inclusive society. The ability of the extreme rich to capture government, it's anti-democratic. And it's antithetical to the goals of justice and inclusive economy. But to be clear, I don't begrudge the wealthy because of their wealth per se, but rather I begrudge how readily that wealth translates into political power and the limits on our capabilities to address our collective existential crises as a result of not being able to utilize that political power. So rooted in all these issues are asymmetries in power and economic agency. I'm going to talk a lot about power today. So what has come to be labeled as an affordability crisis is the result of our public infrastructures that have over-indexed on power and speculation and under-indexed on investments in people. This over-indexing has resulted in stagnated wages that trail our rising costs, along with a yawning wage and productivity gap. So as productivity continues to grow, commensurate wages are not keeping up, and shrinking pathways to things like stable housing and financial security. We have a growing chasm between those that have and those that have not, and we have policies that have systematically undervalued work. Over the past 4 decades in the United States case, inequality is such that the top 1% of households have experienced in that 4-decade period a 10-fold increase, so their wealth has grown by 1,000%, resulting today where the bottom half of Americans own about 2.5% of our nation's vast wealth. If we pan out globally, extreme inequality is even worse. There's a report recently released by Oxfam where they find that the 12 richest people, all men and overwhelmingly white, not exclusively white, 2 of the 12 are Asian descent, hold more wealth than the bottom half of the entire world. That's more than 4 billion people. Basically, economic inclusion and authentic democracy. It's stymied because our nation's wealth, power, resources, media, education curricula, technological surveillance, prisons, businesses, and capital ownership, and virtually all of our institutions are owned, managed, and controlled by a select few billionaires, and based on this trend, not so distant trillionaires. I promise you this won't be all doom and gloom. We're gonna have pathways towards justice. But these conditions are not happenstance. They're the result of policies that have concentrated capital and power. Policies that have prioritized, as I mentioned, speculation and profit over productive investment, and policies that treat people as costs to be contained or managed. Public policies manage deprivation rather than investing in the productive capacities and the shared prosperity of, again, our most treasured resource, which is people. We need economic paradigms, common senses that reject a governing model built to subsidize private interests under the banner of what's come to be called a modern supply-side economics, again, while simply managing people's deprivation. In the American context, President Donald Trump has promised to make America great again. It's evident now that that brand of divisive, identity-stratifying politics, it is embedded in both the economic and social fabric of our country. The president and his administration, if we look at some of the things that's been done, have essentially declared war on the labor movement and with vigor attacked various marginalized groups. He signed executive orders and directed his administration to revoke the constitutional provision of birthright citizenship. He's carried out the detention and disappearance of migrant workers without any due process. He's unilaterally declared that there are only 2 genders. He's threatened funding and called for the elimination of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs. He's threatened the funding and existence of entire government agencies and their workforces, and he's outright assaulted unions, collective bargaining, and this is especially true for federal workers. This summer's partisan budget reconciliation law, it cut Medicaid, food assistance, student loans, and other essential programs while diverting close to $4 trillion by way of our tax code to further tilt our disparate public investments towards wealthy and corporate sectors. But we must reckon that Donald Trump's continued electoral success lays bare our nation's fears, vulnerabilities, divisions, and his sustained popularity. It's a symptom, not a cause. It's a symptom of a bipartisan economy that has failed to promote economic security and prosperity for most workers. The playbook is a tried and tested tool, a political and economic tool to one's relative status. Relative status, it's often legally and socially enforced by the state, can provide individuals with a sense of psychological solace and economic advantage vis-a-vis individuals from another group. So essentially, I'm making a case that race, divisions, identity in general, it gets weaponized. It gets weaponized as a tool with growing inequality, with growing vulnerability, to placate people with the economic solace and psychological stabilization from not being the worse off. And this is grounded in scholarship. Thanks to classical sociologists like Herbert Blummer, his article, Race, Prejudice, and a Sense of Group Positioning, and Cheryl Harris, the legal scholar, critical race theorist, in her work on the whiteness as property. And we can go back to Harvard-trained W.E.B. Du Bois in his thesis on the psychological wages of whiteness, and a field in which I include myself, stratification economics, to understand the ways in which, well beyond the aesthetic, things like identity get weaponized in our political economy. The strategy used today has deep roots tracing as far back as Barry Goldwater's Southern strategy, where appeals to whiteness of Southern voters were made in a context of the relative racial gains that followed the civil rights movement that was led by Dr. Martin Luther King. Barry Goldwater used a similar framing in his policy slogan that you might hear today. He said, "We need to return to a simpler time." So Trump has refined, evolved, and amplified these appeals, offering to his voters a sense of restored status in exchange, in transaction for their political allegiance. It's noteworthy that these appeals to relative status, they're not limited to race. Race is an anchor in the US context, but broadly speaking, relative status is a strategic tool used to weaponize group-based differences in general. Trump's campaign strategically targeted young men by positioning patriarchy and traditional male roles as being under threat, and nativity is an obvious layer of identity that's been leveraged in the campaign, a point of division to which Black and Latino voters themselves are not immune. Still, it is intellectually and tactically a mistake to surmise Trump's appeal as simply rooted in ignorance, hate, failures of our public education system, or some sort of cultural war. Appeals to relative status, and this is the key point for us to understand, are effective precisely because they tap into economic grievance, precarity, and loss. We have an economy that has systematically deprived people of the necessary economic resources they need to thrive, and which has left them vulnerable to the cheap lure of relative identity status distractions. So I said we were going to get upbeat. So way forward, here's a compelling alternative to our current paradigm. An alternative, more enlightened approach is an economic and industrial policy that promotes human flourishing, civic engagement, tranquility, and authentically enables us with affirmative inclusion to be self-determining, to have power in righteous ways with values. That is an economy that centers people in the environments in which we live, and one that systematically invests and directs our public resources to achieve that purpose. In this economic vision, people are not simply viewed as labor inputs to a firm's production process or consumer agents to whom resources might be redistributed to redress inequality in a charitable sense, but rather one with the conception that when properly resourced, people are innovative. They are productive agents that make dynamic contributions that benefit themselves, the economy overall, and they promote healthy, tranquil, safe, and inclusive environments. The biggest crime fighter is a good job. So this means ensuring that people have the economic resources necessary to thrive. Those resources include housing, healthcare, reproductive autonomy, and agency with regards to forming a family. The right to unionize and collectively bargain, income, jobs, capital, education, and the free mobility throughout society without the threat of detention or bodily harm from a state-sanctioned terror because one's identity is linked to a stigmatized group. Our discipline, Richard Freeman and ours, our discipline of economics, if it purports itself as a science, well, that's a big part of our conceptual problem because it presents an innuendo of a purity devoid of politics, devoid of power, and tribalism that we have constantly seen in our society across space and across time throughout human history. The economic concept of freedom and fairness grounded in individual price takers at baseline, it does not adequately take into account the role of power and capital and the uneven distribution of power and capital. Markets are political and social constructions, and constructions that are influenced by these uneven distributions of power and capital. And this is especially true if we want to understand group-based differences across people. Again, let's look at the US and look at race. Despite secular improvements in racial disparities when it comes to education and income, when we look at something like wealth, the racial wealth gap has largely remained unchanged since we've been systematically collecting data. The empirical reality is that race-based disparities persist and even widen with higher socioeconomic attainment. It is not unusual for a black person who has a college degree to live in a household with less wealth than a white person who's dropped out of high school. If we go globally, in the seminal book, Capital in the 21st Century, the French economist Thomas Piketty introduced a widely cited expression in the economic discourse. R is greater than G. In other words, the rate of return to capital is greater than economic-wide growth, greater than our economy growth rate, as a tool for understanding how wealth inequality amongst the elite and capitalist class, how it will continue to grow and outpace others without some intervention. His identity makes clear from a class perspective that initial wealth inequality is important to explaining future inequality. But what was absent from Piketty's analysis was an identity group stratification lens, which emphasizes that initial wealth inequality itself, it's a product of intentional and systematic dispossession of certain groups and privileging other groups. And we can look at classic examples in the US like slavery, or more recently, apartheid South Africa. Indeed, I did a study with some colleagues. We look at the racial wealth gap in both the US and South Africa. And what perhaps it's surprising, two different contexts. One place where emancipation took place centuries ago, one place that recently, within decades, has been done with apartheid, yet the racial wealth gap is alarmingly the same. And what's more, when you control for education, because people say if you get a good education, you get a good job, that's the pathway to prosperity. Well, these disparities in both societies grow with higher levels of education and with higher levels of income. Still, much of the framing around poverty, inequality, and wealth disparity, what it focuses on is poor financial choices on the part of poor and marginalized voters. That framing is wrong. It's wrong because the directional emphasis is wrong. It is more likely that meager economic circumstance, not poor decision-making or deficient knowledge, that meager economic circumstance constrains choice itself and leaves poor borrowers with little to no financial options but to attain and use predatory and abusive financial services. Households and nation states with few assets and low incomes, they're compelled to turn to high-cost, unconventional, alternative financial products. They generally are aware that these products are predatory, but they have little to no alternatives. These last resort debt traps render recipients indentured borrowers, having to pay higher and higher interest rates and fees until ultimately they default on the original principal. The proactive role that our US government has played in determining winners and losers in our economy, especially by race, should be undeniable. Indeed, despite the rhetoric of small and non-interventionist government, we can look at the Reagan administration, which ushered in an era of deregulation, union busting, and an outright assault on unions, government outsourcing, privatization, corporate tax cuts, et cetera, et cetera. And our US government has continued in this policy apparatus both Democrats and Republicans, representing a massive, active, strategic shift in government resources, both economic and political, towards corporate interests and away from labor, with both industrial and economic purpose in mind. This is activist government. This type of government, I'm arguing, is not consistent with shared human flourishing and leaves us vulnerable to contexts of fear, despair, and inequality for which we remain vulnerable. So our public infrastructure should first and foremost serve the interests of people and with affirmative inclusion. The labor movement has long understood this. We can look at A. Philip Randolph, the president of the Brotherhood and Sleeping Car Porters and the vice president of the AFL-CIO. He explicitly linked a concept of economic rights to civil rights. Beginning as far back as the 1940s, he, along with other civil rights leaders, organized a movement to demand from government both racial and economic justice, with the provision of quality jobs for all people. This eventually culminated in the March on Washington for Jobs. Randolph's leadership brought the labor movement into the fight for civil rights, and he brought the civil rights movement into the fight for labor rights. Randolph influenced Dr. King, who became more explicit about the connections between economic rights, freedom, and racial justice. King's thinking evolved from understanding that integration and political rights were not enough, and that for people to truly be free, it required resources and economic rights. So King wrote, "I'm now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now and widely discussed measure, a guaranteed income." King called for a federal job guarantee, guaranteed income. He even called for reparations, and his belief that, broadly speaking, poverty was a moral failing of our nation. And his 1968 Poor People's Campaign sought to build solidarity across racial lines, uniting poor people in the pursuit of economic security and prosperity. Tragically, and perhaps not coincidentally, his life was cut short in 1968 while standing in solidarity with striking sanitation workers in Memphis. Before this phase, the economic rights phase of his vision could fully be realized, leaving a profound legacy of unfinished work for us to complete. In an international context, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which was led by an international coalition led by Eleanor Roosevelt, it identified 5 categories of human rights: civil rights, political rights, social rights, cultural rights, and economic rights. In isolation, any subset of human rights, they're incomplete and inadequate. In fact, they are a co-optation of the notion of rights itself. Over the years, when we think about those 5 categories, economic rights has been the category that has lost the most momentum. Its exclusion has served as the impetus of the co-optation of notions of rights. Inclusive economic rights would ensure that people have enabling goods and services and resources to live productive, healthy, and tranquil lives. That UN Declaration of Human Rights, it's important to understand the political context in which it emerged. It came out of the Second World War. It came out of economic destabilization that preceded it, and it was meant with the intent to promote flourishing and tranquility at a time when despair within and among nation states was ubiquitous. If people remember the Marshall Plan coming out of World War II, I would argue that was our best foreign policy ever, when there was intent to invest in the productive capacities of foreign states so as to promote a system so we wouldn't have World War III. What might have been problematic about the Marshall Plan that sought to rebuild Europe after World War II is that it stopped at Europe. It didn't extend to the global south, to other areas that were also involved and included in World War II and harmed by World War II. But here's the point. Without resources, because of power asymmetries, individuals are largely restricted from the full benefits of economic markets. Instead, they are left to the vulnerable exploitation and whims of charity engaged in a transaction. So any transaction where some person or some party doesn't have resources, that's not a transaction. That is a system of exploitation or vulnerability to the whim of charity. If you want transactions, have at it, but ensure that people can actually engage in them. Further, investments in a healthy, renewable environment, well, that's a necessary precursor to have a healthy democracy and more inclusive, productive, and tranquil living, especially in a sustainable way. Public investments in our capabilities empower us. So if we're thinking about the affordability crisis, if you have power and capabilities, then you're not vulnerable to predation. It will address our affordability crisis, and what's more, it will generate positive externalities and productive macro multipliers that benefit people, their communities, and our economy overall. So to be clear, our political economy today, it naturalizes poverty and inequality by framing it as the result of unproductive and deficient behavior. Subpar outcomes are attributed to personal choices of individuals and communities. The erosion of union density has profoundly weakened collective bargaining and left us vulnerable to exploitation and political exclusion. So pessimism, cynicism, and inaction, that's not going to reverse these trends. Dr. King and his civil rights partners, they had the economic foresight to know that in order to fight against the conditions that facilitate strongman politics, we must defang that which gives it its power. And that is an economy that is grounded in despair, risk, insecurity, and the growing chasm between the haves and the have-nots. From his jail cell in Birmingham, King wrote that famous letter where he said, quote, "I have now almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice." I argue that exerting claim on our economy is going to begin and require us to build movements and organizations that can exact and demand the conditions to truly empower us all. You get to define the economy. We need people in solidarity, organizing and shaping democracy itself. That is the mechanism to transform an economy from the ground up. But this solidarity should not be reduced to an interest convergence, especially since interests converge in one context, but may not converge in another context. A solidarity based solely on the norms of self-interest, it defaults to the interest and the relative status of those that have dominant status in a group. And it leaves those coalitions vulnerable to greed, and they won't be sustainable. That form of solidarity would fail to capture the multiple dimensions in which we can define human prosperity, including collective well-being, tranquility, and the inherent dignity in all people. A stronger, more sustainable solidarity is one that supports the inclusion and the humanity of the entire coalition and facilitates individuals to choose the identity to which they belong, and at the same time dismantling the inhumane structures that promote the material and psychological advantage or disadvantage based on somebody's identity. So at a time when trust in our government is tanking, we have an opportunity to demonstrate a governance approach that centers people as the purpose of our economy, and as the primary mechanism to achieve that purpose. So going back to the original provocation, to address our affordability crisis, perhaps we should put our trust in people and offer the resources and the public infrastructure to match that trust. We should invest in our human capabilities, our democratic institutions, our shared prosperity. We should choose a governing paradigm that recognizes that people are the best infrastructure we have and live up to the creed of a multiracial democracy with inclusive prosperity. Congratulations to you all. I'm grateful for all your services. I wish you all the luck, and I strongly believe that our salvation is grounded in people power, so please bring us to salvation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hamilton. I'm sorry, my voice is kind of going. I thought I'd bring the sexy in today. Here. Good morning. I'm Alida Castillo, the director of the Harvard Trade Union Program. I've spent the last 5 weeks with the graduates, making sure they were getting a good education. Every year, each class has its own personality. This class came prepared with an open mind, ready to learn and participate. They were very engaged and eager to share their experiences so that they could learn from each other in a very respectful way. Perhaps the daily mindful minutes or magical moments helped ground them and keep them focused. I want you all to remember and continue to take care of yourselves, to be a good leader. Take care of yourselves and notice what you notice. As part of the graduation ceremony, the class is asked to choose the 2 people who best embody the essence of the program to be their graduation speakers. This year, no 2 better people could have been chosen. For your graduation speakers, we will have first Julia McKay from the United Steelworkers, followed by Doc Roberts from the International Association of Firefighters. Julia.
Emma Gonflag, Datanish Nusham, Julia McKay, Duayu. Good morning, everyone. Julia McKay is my name. Welcome, guests, family, friends, alumni, faculty, and especially the 113th graduating class of the Harvard Trade Union Program. Doc and I have the honor, or honor with a U for my non-American siblings, and the pleasure of speaking on behalf of this absolutely amazing and hands-down most hilarious group of union siblings. As the kids would say, they are fire. Also, please note there may be a colorful word or two. It's just sometimes those are the most appropriate words. First off, I would ask that the class stand with me. And really, we want to thank Sharon, Taya, Yuri, and everyone working behind the scenes that made this the most unforgettable experience, and especially Alida. Thank you. I don't know about y'all, but when this opportunity presented itself, I was speechless. It seemed really too good to be true. But also the thought of being away from my family, from our homes, from everything that we have for 5 weeks, it felt daunting and overwhelming. We had so much to coordinate: our work, our kids, our pets, our 12 cats, Doc, every aspect of our lives, so that we could commit ourselves fully to this once-in-a-lifetime experience. Some of us were able to bring our families with us and our fur babies. Say hi to Kevin for me, Thea. And we even made some new fur baby friends along the way. We packed up and left our homes, some of us just hopping in our cars and braving the Massachusetts traffic to get here. I only almost died once. And some of us venturing a little further. We came from beautiful coastal mountains, bustling cities, rolling golden fields, and small town vistas. Some of us left the balmy sunshine to enjoy all that winter in Boston has to offer. Dry skin, bitter cold, a plague or two, red line urinators, but we survived. We came from across the US and around the world, from the fjords of Norway, historic United Kingdom, and the Great White North. And then there's frickin' Hamish. We arrived that first day, most of us strangers meeting for the first time, really uncertain what to expect. But after a few drum beats and some heavy eye contact, we became fast friends. We also became a little more mindfully magical and a little more juicy. Over the past 5 weeks, we have shared our work stories, and of course, we've shared deeper and more personal stories. Stories of being on picket lines and in union halls as kids, stories of our fights and our struggles, our losses, our traumas. We shared the small pieces that make us, us. We also shared beers, bagels, thanks to Lou, and laughs. And we learned a little more than we wanted to know about turkeys. We became experts in the braking system and maneuverability of Harvard buses. But some of us proved not to be experts in Google Maps. It's a little concerning that it was the firefighters, but we'll let it slide. We went on adventures exploring all that this historic university and city have to offer, including an oyster bar or two, and a pub, or 10, but you know who's counting. But I think we all know where our favorite bar is. We danced, we sang, memories were made. I didn't get to share in all the moments, but I do cherish the ones that I did get to share in. Like getting to see the joy on Isla's face when she was served her very first Bloody Mary with a little lemon wedge for a garnish and an olive and some shrimp and some bacon, peppers, an oyster, half a lobster. It was pure joy, but you haven't tried a Caesar yet. I dare say, even though we were little frozen duckies on tour on that first Friday, we would have followed Jack to the ends of the earth. Jack for president. But we did some learning as well. We learned a lot about each other's unions. We learned that the elevator constructors are a little cooler than I thought. Even codes and standards, Josh. We learned that state troopers really do think that they are sexy as hell in uniform. But I think an RCMP officer might give you a run for your money. We marveled at David Weil's ability to take chaos on a chalkboard, draw a few circles and a few lines, and just bring it all together for us. We sat captivated and in awe of Bill Fletcher and Mark Ehrlich's history prowess. And I have to say, this really is the first union function where I was offered a free colonoscopy. There really is no doubt that we learned from some of the most amazing humans, and we thank you. We have broadened our vocabularies and tried out an accent or two, eh? Who knew there were so many words for restrooms and trash? As a Canadian, I also learned something fun. I thought I was saying sorry enough, but sorry, Jess, sorry. You proved me wrong, sorry. We leaned on each other and asked the burning questions, some that I can't repeat here today, but we will get you an answer, Isla. Only among union families can you share your life stories, followed by some really deep conversations about nudist music festivals and throat baloney opening for Tom Darvich. And we truly did become a family. We have a Boston dad who welcomed us into his home. We welcomed each other into our unions, into our circles, into our cultures. We shared hockey games, we shared football games, American football. We shared all things labor, our fights, our struggles, our ideas, our aspirations. We shared the great work that our unions are doing and how we can make it better. Our time here has enriched us beyond words. All of these things, all of these experiences, the essence of who we truly are, has really made us the greatest group of leaders and allies. I can't wait to see what's next for everyone, and I hope to be able to share in everyone's journey. So, in the immortal words of the United Steelworkers' soon-to-be installed new president, our first female and woman of color, Roxanne Brown, let's go do some epic shit.
Jules, that's a tough act to follow, but I'm going to do my best here. How's everybody doing? Everybody all right? Well, good morning, friends and family, faculty and staff, those who helped guide us daily and mainly challenged us every single moment of coursework we've had. Jack and Alida, we can't thank you enough. You guys have been excellent shepherds of the program. And to my fellow graduates of the Harvard Trade Union program, it's an honor to stand with you here today. Seems like just yesterday, many of us traveled many miles over land and sea to gather at one of the most prestigious learning institutions in the world. We're in Harvard right now. Can you believe that? Yeah, from a kid from California, it's quite an accomplishment just to be here today. It really is. We all arrived as presidents, business agents, national organizers, communications directors, editors, political directors, senior staff reps, and fighters for the working class. And after day one, it was very clear we were going to earn the title of student one more time. But somewhere between the homework, hours and hours and hours of case study, the train rides, the magic moments, Tim's pub, and the late night debates with Jack and the gang, something shifted. There was a movement that happened. We weren't just learning about leadership, labor history, strategic planning and economics, all important things. We were being transformed into a powerful and influential instrument for the working class. A body that would stand strong in the face of injustice and provide a voice to the voiceless. We were all redefining what it means to be a leader. Several values came into focus over the last several weeks for me. One lesson became crystal clear. Believing in each other simply is not enough. We all believe in the working class, that's why we're here, but belief without action and discipline is just a feeling. It just sits there quietly in the background. Passion without strategy or structure seldom results in the outcomes we desire. Discipline is what this program sharpened in us. The discipline to build systems before slogans, the discipline to plan and strategize for the future, the discipline to gather knowledge and prepare before we speak. Passion and belief can move people, but discipline is what ultimately wins the war. Another conversation piece is power. Learned a lot about power. I was struck with the truth that has echoed across this room many times, matter of fact, this morning, sir. Across continents, across political divide, and across our checkered history of labor. Power is never granted. Power is fought for, and it is built. No one institution can protect it for us, and no generation guarantees it. Power must be fought for, organized, maintained, and always defended. Whether we represent iron workers, public employees, firefighters, healthcare professionals, elevator operators, excuse me, where are you at? Where are my elevator guys at? Oh yeah, right in the front. Oh yeah, that's right. You guys are gonna correct me and I love it. My one state trooper, Jeff, where you at? Public safety's in the house, amen. or in my case of having spent much of my life in a firehouse, one thing becomes clear very quickly. We must train as if our life depends on it, because it does. Preparation determines outcomes long before the alarm sounds. The same holds true in all of our unions. This is interesting. Power equals change, and union equals power. It's an interesting equation. Leadership. We also learned that leadership isn't simply a title, and leadership can't be faked, can't be bought or stolen. Leadership is where the courageous and bold speak truth to power. Leadership is where preparation meets responsibility, and that responsibility and weight is what we all will be carrying leaving here today. We're not leaving here with simply certificates. We're leaving here with a debt to our members that trust us, a debt to our families that depend on us, a debt in knowing that the decisions we make can have a real and long-lasting impact for our members and their families. We owe a debt. At some point in our lives, we all stood at a fork in the road. We could have all have chosen something easier, that's for sure. Little less pressure, little less scrutiny, little less resistance, fewer difficult conversations, but we didn't. That's not who we are. Robert Frost once wrote in The Road Not Taken about two roads diverging in a wood. In choosing one, knowing it would make all the difference. Roads often look similar in the moment, but to me, the difference is not in the road. The difference is in who walks it. We walk into rooms where people need a voice. We walk into situations where people need a steady hand. We walk towards conflict others simply avoid. We choose to fight for power instead of complaining about its absence. We choose to build instead of blame. We choose responsibility when comfort is too easy. And one day, when the gravity of this moment is measured, not by the ceremony, not by the certificate, but by the battles we fought, the contracts we've won, the workplace we've strengthened, and the workers that now have a voice. The difference will not be the circumstance, it will not be the system, definitely will not be the road. It will be the disciplined who fought through the noise. It will be the battled leader who showed up prepared for the fight. It will be the courageous that built power instead of waiting for it. The difference will be us. We are the difference. Thank you.
Okay, the presentation of the certificates. And we're going to start with Adrian Jones. Alexis Lyman. Brandon Flanzer. Brian R. Dunn. Christopher O. Hall. New Jersey. David Douglas. Dean Fadif. Eric Colley. Gabriel Miralis. Hamish Kennedy McCracken. Isla Roberts. James F. O'Donnell. James H. Walker. James Hanna. Jeffrey S. Hawkins. Jessica Craig. John J. O'Connor. Josh Joseph. Julia McKay. Luciano Padilla. Michael Brunbow. Michael Fenice. Michael Relian. Michelle Evans. Neil Kelly. Rachel Running. Reginald C. Silvers. Richard Smith Orchard. Stephen A. Simpson. Thea Setterbo. Tiffany McKay. Tim Morgan. Hey, Tim.
Yes.
Now, I just want to let people know. Okay. Yes, of course. Sorry. Darryl Doc Roberts, last but not least. Sorry. Sorry for letting you down. That's my bad. I failed in my central task, the speaker. I do want to say one or two things. Please stay. We have a reception. I'm starting very carefully. And I just want very quick reflection. Thank you for all the kind words that the class said about us and the staff. It really touched our hearts. But I do want to say at Harvard University, over my lifetime, there's been a lot of great improvements in our university in the diversity and range of backgrounds of people. But one thing that's not reflected on enough is that we had this big study of the top most prestigious 39 universities in the country, and there were more people from the top 1% of income than from the bottom 60% of income. And a lot of times Harvard talks a lot about what Harvard does for its students, but I want to express my appreciation to this class because you bring working class perspectives to this place. You bring things that many other groups that are brought here sometimes are missing the point. And so it's very important we have you here. Robert Reich used to say, the faculty should have to pay for the privilege of coming to teach you because we learn so much from you while you're here. And incredible gratitude to you for all the kindness you've shown. And I hope people can stay for the reception. We'll continue the conversation. Thanks so much.